Welcome to Powering the Future Within, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Omari Bouknight, CEO of Resident Link Medical. Each episode, we speak with a leader who is driving the next wave of medical innovation, advancing technologies that are smarter, less invasive, and more connected than ever before. This is where the future of health takes shape. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Dr. Stephen Mickelsen, a physician entrepreneur who has helped redefine the future of cardiac ablation. He is the founder of FARAPulse, the company that pioneered pulsed field ablation, a breakthrough technology that is rapidly transforming the treatment of atrial fibrillation around the world. He is now the founder of Field Medical, where he's continuing to explore new ways to use energy-based technologies to treat cardiac arrhythmias. Dr. Mickelsen combines the perspective of a clinician, inventor, and founder, and his work sits right at the frontier of where medicine and engineering meet. Stephen, welcome to Powering the Future Within.
Thank you for inviting me, Omari.
This is a true pleasure for me. I'm a real fan of pulse field ablation and how it's really transforming the field. But I'm curious to kind of start back at the beginning to understand what originally pulled you into medicine and at what point did you realize that you wanted to shape technologies?
Well, I have a little bit of an unusual background. I didn't start off wanting to be a doctor. Started off wanting to be a professional musician. I had a day job in a hospital. For the first decade, I was touring and I releasing records, and then sometime my day job became much more exciting, and I really loved I was working closely with a cardiac electrophysiologist named Fred Kuzumoto, and at that time, there was a lot of innovation ongoing in the EP field, and I just fell in love with the technology, the process, and the constant innovation in that space. And I decided to go to college and and then go to medical school after that.
So what kind of music, what genre were you pulled to?
Well, I guess it would be called like college, indie, alternative, and if you can imagine the early '90s, which were so long ago, the there were a couple of bands that the first band that got signed was a band called the Bellyacres, college alt rock, and then another band called Venus Diablo, which was more like beatnik rock meets kind of progressive theater.
Wow. Any particular instruments or vocalist or
Yeah, I was a singer and songwriter. I wasn't a very good musician, but I surrounded myself with really, really amazing musicians, and that's what made it work.
wow, that's fantastic. We'll definitely perhaps have to carve out a little bit of a session where you can stretch your vocal cords and show us what you got.
Yeah, the only person who likes to listen to me sing anymore is my daughter. So, she's too young to complain, or at least one of them is too young to complain.
So by training, then you do decide to pursue medicine, and by training, you're an electrophysiologist. Maybe you can just describe what that is for those who don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Electrophysiology sounds fancy, but it's a heart doctor that specializes in the rhythm of the heart. So the heart is a pump. It has valves that open and close like doors. Its job is to move blood around into the lungs and into the body, but it also has its own electrical system, kind of like the brain does. If you cut out the heart and you sew it into somebody else, it kind of comes with its own electrical system and its own ability to work. And that's what an electrophysiologist focuses on, is treating the problems that arise from the heart going too slow or going way too fast.
So the musician was attracted to a field that deals with rhythm.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right, right on beat. Uh,
Yeah.
so what drew you to that field in particular?
Well, like I said, I kind of ended up there accidentally. I needed some income when I wasn't touring because I don't know if you know this, but it's very hard to make money as a musician. So, but and I just happened to work in the ICU and then trained in the cath lab in an era when it was possible to do that without a degree. I was on the job training, and the doctors took me under their wing, and I was just scrubbing in with them and working on started doing research, and that research was related to arrhythmia stuff, and ablation in particular. And so I got to actually meet a lot of the people who were the true pioneers in the field.
Right. And during that time when you were going through electrophysiology training, electrophysiology as a field was still relatively new and novel, and there was a lot of
Yeah,
innovation coming through and rapidly changing. I
that's
think
right.
electrophysiology has been interesting because it's really kind of a combination of art and science, trial and error, not unlike developing music.
Yeah, yeah. They had, it's there are a lot of musicians who end up and interestingly enough, engineers who an undergrad who end up in the field of cardiac electrophysiology. And I think you have to be a little bit nerdy and really enjoy technology in a way that is perhaps not a healthy love of a technology, because you're really driven by the tools that are used to achieve things that were impossible to do in the past. I mean, literally any arrhythmia was either treated with drugs, which are all toxins that are just, most of them don't work very well and they have a lot of side effects, or you would get open heart surgery, and nobody wants that. So minimally invasive procedures evolved over the course of the last 35 years to be something that is almost routine now, but depends heavily on really cool technology.
Yeah, yeah. And to that point, I mean, you're treating patients, the field is transforming literally week to week, month to month. Was there any specific patient moment or patients that you encountered that helped inspire you to want to become an innovator?
Well, from my point of view, the main reason I made the leap was I wanted from being, to go to college, get an undergrad degree, and be a straight A student, so I could go to medical school. Was the desire to be involved in the development of the technology itself. So it was really my desire to get the privilege of working on that technology that drove me to become a physician. I learned to fall in love with being a physician after I had already dedicated my life to how to invent things and build better technology.
Interesting. So why not pursue engineering then, for example?
You just don't get uh y- you don't get the front row seat to the unmet need. You just don't get to see where the problems are, and in the same way. And so solving those problems from afar, you're listening to lots of input. But if you're the one trying to solve the problem for the patient who sits in front of you, which is, that's yeah, it's a much stronger connection to understanding where the problem is. And I just thought it would give me a lot more ability to have a leg up in that innovation space if I was the guy having to put a pacemaker in, if I was the guy having to move catheters around in the body. And it would give me credibility for the science.
Right. Yeah. That's a great perspective, a front row seat of the unmet need. And a lot of the entrepreneurs and innovators that we talk to, and investors, quite frankly, a lot of the conversation goes back to entrepreneurs wanting or needing to have a front row seat of the unmet need, and really uncovering those unmet needs then is what unlocks what the application could be, what the innovation could be to help solve the unmet need. So you saw that from a very early stage, did you have confidence that by seeing the unmet need that you would also then have solutions that you would be able to conceive of?
Yeah, and maybe that's, I mean, I think you hit on it, Amari, that like, yeah, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know personally, they have they have an urgency of creativity and thinking and um to create, they live with a mission every day, and solving those problems is just something that part is just what's coming somewhat naturally as you observe the challenges that are in front of you. And I think, I don't think it's unique to me by any means. I think that it's, it is a category of human being who kind of sees, and then maybe it's related to writing songs and painting paintings and that creative kind of, you know, part, but the EP space, it was a particularly rapidly moving and fertile space for me to start uh, ideating on how could we make it better.
Right. Great. So let's talk about pulse field ablation. What is it?
Oh yeah, so pulse field ablation. What EP doctors do when they're treating tachycardia is they put little catheters up inside the body, right? So they got to do a couple of things. They got to identify where the problem is, diagnose it. We use kind of a number of techniques, pacing and recording the electrograms on the inside of the heart, and mapping systems and imaging systems. We combine all that to figure out where the problem is, and then we navigate a catheter to that spot, and then we deliver energy to destroy the abnormal tissue that's causing the problem. And so, the what pulse field is a fancy term. It's a marketing term. It's also called DC ablation. It's called fulguration. It's called electroporation. It has a lot of names, but it's electric field mediated tissue injury. And so that's a highly technical way of saying, hey, the you can destroy tissue lots of ways. You can use, lasers, ultrasound, freeze it. You can put alcohol in it. You can put, chemotherapeutics and the diphtheria toxin and poison arrow frog stuff, whatever, right? There's lots of ways to harm the tissue to create a lesion to destroy abnormal tissue. Pulse field is just a way of doing it with very strong electric pulses. And unlike almost every other way that you're going to kill the cell, what you're really doing is you're using very strong electric fields to induce a metabolic injury that the cell dies by depleting its reserves of energy. And this allows for the potential of selectivity and the ability to the body to repair and heal much more rapidly. And so there's huge advantages for that energy source that I think people are now starting to recognize.
So let's step through that a little bit. So we're discussing about targeting arrhythmias, which are essentially abnormal heartbeats. In this case, you're referring to tachycardia, which would mean an abnormally fast heartbeat. There's a portion of the heart that's really driving that. And as an electrophysiologist, you're targeting the abnormal heart tissue and you're finding a way to neutralize it or to destroy it or to kill it. But what you don't want to do is then harm healthy tissue around it. So, what pulse field ablation is doing for us is allowing us to really select that tissue that's causing the abnormality. And I think the way that it functions with these electrical pulses is so interesting, targeting the metabolic components, which means that it's sparing a lot of the tissue around it and not harming the healthy tissue.
Yeah, it has the potential to spare some of the collateral tissues in a way that thermal injury doesn't, and certain types of toxins don't. But you said it very well, which is, the promise is that we have this ability to do this, but not only do it safer, have better outcomes, but to do it also in a very time efficient way. And so the electroporation or pulse field ablation, when it came into my realm of understanding, when I started trying to figure out how to treat AFib in 2011, I really saw that as an important unmet need, because as we started seeing more and more of these procedures being done for a nuisance problem, I wanted to make sure that we had a safer and more time efficient way to do it, because how are you going to treat millions of people if you have, in those days, it was a 4-hour procedure,
Right.
and then it's a nuisance problem. So if you have a complication in a scenario like that, it's a real tragedy, because you really, the demands for a very high safety bar are there. And so that was a lot of the motivation to look for what are other ways that we can do this besides thermal ablation. And then uh, DC ablation from the 1980s is electroporation. When I looked at that, I said, well, why not use this,
Interesting.
but
So if
do a modern version of it.
right.
So,
So if you were to do a comparison, and we're talking about ablation for atrial fibrillation, there's millions and millions who are suffering from atrial fibrillation worldwide, which is this abnormal heartbeat in the upper chambers of the heart. And one of the reasons why it's important to address atrial fibrillation is that it's highly connected or correlated with stroke events. So, people with atrial fibrillation that are high risk for stroke, and there are different ways that you might be able to help address this. Atrial fibrillation has become one of the predominant ways of doing so. So, what would a atrial fibrillation ablation look like in the early days when you were training on it, versus how does that look when you're using pulse field ablation?
well, when I was a technician working at a hospital with Fred Kuzumoto, I joked to him that I thought we'll never be ablating AFib, because nobody was. A few people were trying to reproduce what was done surgically with catheters. But it was in the late 90s, some French physician scientists came up with a solution, which was to isolate the areas in the heart of the left atria called the pulmonary vein. So the anatomy. There's a place in the heart where we've noticed that people who have AFib, the, the abnormal tissue that is initiating it and keeping it going and causing the symptoms and all that stuff, and all the sequelae of problems that fall out from it, like stroke, etc. They figured out, oh, all you have to do is isolate these sections of the heart, and voila, you're done. So early ablation was done with a radiofrequency catheter in the majority of cases. That's a way of cauterizing or heating up the tissue. And you would just kind of go around the veins point by point by point by point by point. And it took a long time, and it took a lot of skill. But as people started doing it more and more, instead of 50 cases a year, hundreds of cases a year, thousands of cases a year, and then the guidelines came out, where it was recognized as, boy, this is an important segment of what we do as doctors. We started really seeing where the complications were coming out, and if you're going to treat millions of people, it can't be a complex procedure like that. And so, as people got more and more innovative, the mapping systems got better, and some tools like the cryoballoon, which is a tool that kind of sticks in the vein and then all in one shot kind of ablates it. That was what was going on at the time, that I decided that I wanted to look at how to fix it, how to do it better. It was still a very long procedure, and what I saw is, we're not going to be able to treat all these people unless we get safer technology, and we get it so it's sub 1 hour routine and anyone can do it.
Fascinating. And so then what's the origin story behind Farapulse, which ultimately was at the forefront of this transformation?
Yeah, so Farapulse started off as a company I called Iowa Approach. So I was in training at the University of Iowa at the time. I'd gone from undergrad to the University of New Mexico for medical school. Then I went to the Mayo Clinic, and I spent some time at the NIH as a Howard Hughes research scholar when I was there. And then after Mayo Clinic, I came to the University of Iowa. I kind of knew EP before I even started the process, but during that time in Iowa, I had a couple of technologies had thought up and was inventing, and I ended up getting funded to do um, this new technology for treating atrial fibrillation. And I needed to apply for an SBIR grant. And this is kind of boring, but it was out of necessity. The university asked me to start a company and license my technology back to that company and try to develop it, because it's one thing to have an idea, but it's another thing to shepherd the idea all the way to market. And that was an exciting proposition to me. So Farapulse kind of grew out of Iowa Approach, which was a uh, I built the generator, I built the catheters, and then I started hiring people, raising money with with some early uh, help from a friend of mine, John Slump, and hired a guy named Eric. And then eventually I realized, I need to bring in a professional CEO to drive success of the technology. So I sought out and found a guy, Alan Zingler, and hired a bunch of people, and then we changed the name. And the reason it was called Iowa Approach is because as an entrepreneur, I had to raise money in Iowa. I want to make sure people kind of yeah,
Yeah,
identified, the farmers who are going to invest in this, or, they identified it as, a good investment for their Iowa roots.
right.
And but that's, the birth of Fairpulse was quite interesting because, I ran it for about 2.5 years myself. And then I brought on Alan, and we got a large investment from Boston Scientific early on, very supportive, and ultimately sold the company to Boston Scientific.
Right. And now if you look at PFA even more broadly, it's become one of the most rapidly adopted new technologies in the history of all of medtech. I mean,
Yeah,
there are some real great stories out there about adoption, but I think it probably rivals the adoption of drug-eluting stents, for example, in interventional cardiology as one of the most rapidly adopt modalities. How does that
yeah.
feel?
Well, look, I was working in the cath lab as a technician in the era of the last waning days of twilight of plain old balloon angioplasty. And so I got to see the impact of a truly disruptive technology on the hospital. Maybe that was part of the inspiration. But why Farapulse is like that? Why Pulse Field in particular? A number of the companies were working on it at the time. I wasn't alone, but Farapulse was really the first person to challenge the standard and say, hey, we're going to take it all the way to market, whether you think it's good or not. And then people started, when they saw the results in the clinical trial, they saw the value proposition, which is you can do this really fast. It's democratizing. So almost any doctor who does EP can do it, and it's safer. And it's pretty rare in the world of medtech innovation where you have something that has a dramatic impact on workflow without compromising something. So this technology not only had the promise of being safer, less esophageal injury, less phrenic nerve injury, less pulmonary vein stenosis, all those things that have been plaguing the field. But also now we got sub 1 hour routine AFib ablation available. So now we can do twice as many cases, if not more, than we could in the past. So in other words, we've not opened up the floodgates for to address more patients, because EP doctors take forever to train, and hospital infrastructure takes forever to to grow. But boy, if you can take a procedure and take it from 4 hours to 1 hour, now you've really opened up access for patients who can benefit from the procedure without compromising the safety. And I think that's really what drove what was just a phenomenal uh, transformation in the field. I mean, literally overnight, thermal ablation has is just falling off the map, and we're moving towards pulse field in almost every part of the heart.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And I think one of the other aspects of the characteristics that driven the adoption is that it doesn't really require the physician to adopt a new workflow. The learning curve is very low. So this burden of learning is very low. And you add that with the efficiency and then especially the safety profile, it's really set up to be a widely adopted technology.
Yeah, and you can see the success of the fast followers that are out there. Like, there's a lot of pivots, and even those pivots are substantially better than their original applications. And so it's really exciting to see this explosion and innovation in the space that I absolutely love, which is arrhythmia management and electrophysiology.
Right. So was there a moment or a procedure where you said to yourself or out loud, this will be a game changer, will be disruptive for these reasons? Was there a moment in time or an observation early on where you really became compelled or convicted because of something you observed?
Yeah, well, um, a couple of things. That now for Farapulse in the early days, and in the Iowa approach days, I saw the promise of the energy, the promise of the procedure, and the goals. And I knew people who had been harmed by complications. But there is a story in my like I've started a couple of companies, and there is a company I started that is a direct result of something very personal. That I My brother died from a complication of a biopsy. Simple biopsy, putting a needle in, trying to get a piece so that you can look at it under a microscope, but they hit an artery, and it didn't end well. I started a company called Needle Eye to try to address that by creating a tool that would allow you to see what's in front of the needle as you advance it through the body. So whether you're going after a biopsy or vascular access, that would be it. And so that can really drive fire in you to innovate. Every entrepreneur, kind of falls into this space where anything you're working on is the greatest thing on earth, and it's got to be obvious to everybody. This is amazing, right? Oh, and but in the early days, the innovation and the speed and the excitement surrounding it, I thought it would have a normal adoption. I did not expect to see the something, early adopters and then kind of this organic growth afterwards. No, no, it was truly a disruptive technology, and I did not predict that level of excitement,
So
even in the early
okay,
days.
so that was even a surprise to you as an entrepreneur who was completely bought in. Wow.
Yeah. And like I predicted a lot of the challenges we would see and the complications and the anticipated, issues that would arise with this, but I missed a few that really surprised me. There's been more of an issue with hemolysis and I kicked myself in the butt for not kind of anticipating that. Some of these issues with late vasospasm, which are very rare, but everyone is scratching their head right now. And like, oh, those are the things that we're talking about as doctors who are kind of seeing this transformation in the field and this rapid adoption. But what we're walking away from is massive challenges with esophageal injury and phrenic nerve injury and all these things that we used to have to deal with, close to a one, 0.5% or 1% of people, and so we've moved the bar of safety substantially in the right direction, but we're not out of the woods.
Yeah, yeah. No, we always want to focus on improvement and how do we get better. But I always think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you start
Yeah,
with, from a safety perspective, what are the implications around mortality? And then you kind of move from there. And it definitely feels like we've moved the ball. Something like an esophageal injury during ablation can be catastrophic. If
yeah,
you've ever had spoken to a physician who encountered an esophageal fistula, that can be catastrophic. Phrenic
yeah,
nerve injury can be highly problematic, and if you're able to progress from those to safety concerns that maybe are less life threatening, you've certainly advanced the ball quite a bit.
exactly, exactly. I mean, I'm pretty proud to be a part of that story. But boy, there's a lot of people who are part of that story. It's kind of fun to see that first generation of technology,
Yes.
making a difference on making a real difference in people's lives.
Yes, success has many parents, and I think that probably has to be part of the joy of the journey, is doing it together with a team, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you go through this exercise, you have tremendous success, and it feels like that's really filled your cup to want to continue to pursue innovations and continue to explore unmet needs. Very personal story with the situation with your brother, but you kind of understand how this innovation engine works. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the transition. Many physicians struggle with the leap from clinician to executive. You always kind of had the intention of working on innovation. Was there anything difficult for you about the transition, and any advice that you would give to other clinicians who are considering working on innovation?
Yeah, it is incredibly challenging. One of the things that I have a lot of physician friends who are inventors and very, very smart, talented, and in lockstep with the needs of the field and what needs to happen next. There are a lot of doctors out there who are really good at figuring out what is the next step in technology that we need today, right? But then when they want to and they want to kind of make the leap into being an entrepreneur, starting a company, taking their idea and stewarding it to a commercial reality. That's a much bigger leap. And so I usually I talk a lot about to fellow physician inventor entrepreneurs, that the things that I've learned, that fundamentally, doctors have a different skill set than business people. Um, you know, we uh, we train. It's in the interventional space of doctors in particular, to really make high stakes decisions. That's quickly and often without the luxury of consensus. You got a patient in front of you that might be dying. You got to make a decision, fix it, and move forward. And so doctors are just full of executive function. Their ability to move quick and make decisions and choose a path forward, great. But the executive role often is a different skill set, right? A different type of training. You're dealing with organizations and consensus building and teams. You need to, much like a scientist, physician scientist would do, you have to build, a justification and story behind whatever you're doing. But being savvy in contracts, in fundraising, and all those things, the blind spots are glaring, and so it's hard to be good at everything, and so I've met a few people who seem to be, but I'm not one of them, and so there's a lot of hard lessons, and so when I talk to clinicians about, moving to that role of startup, I usually say, pay a lot of attention to finding ways to understand your own blind spots, and then surround yourself with the people who are really good at it, because it's going to take you time. If you're a first time entrepreneur, it's going to take you time to see it play out and how people approach these questions and these problems. You're good at the technology, but are you good at the operations of a startup. And so my advice for most guys is, if you're crazy enough to jump in and just go go for it, then I support you, but be ready to to lay yourself bare in front of all your own deficiencies. And that was my experience as a physician jumping to the next stage. Luckily, my first experience, I recognized I didn't have the skills to be a CEO. So I brought one on,
Right.
and then I worked with a lot of startups and a lot of technology and engaged and became an executive at a company and learned and learned and learned. And that's what I think led to a lot of the success that we've had at Field, is that I jumped into Field with a heck of a lot more experience.
Yeah. Yeah. But that takes a lot of self-reflection to identify that, and I find it fascinating what you mentioned about physicians, particularly those who are operators, being filled with executive function,
Yeah.
and how important that is in the operating room or the cath lab or the EP lab. But you step into an organization where you have to drive consensus building, and you can run into issues very quickly. So having that type of self-reflection to compare the two environments, I think, is very important. And as you mentioned, so you've continued on with innovations in pulse field ablation. Tell us about Field Medical.
Field Medical is my favorite company of all time. Yeah. So when I was, so I was practicing at Scripps Medical Center, and I still have an appointment at the University of Iowa, and I took an executive position at Acutus Medical, which is a mapping and EP technology ablation company, and help them to take a catheter that they already had and convert it into an ablation catheter. So as that program was winding down, because there were some issues with the runway of of that innovation in the market, I stepped out of that company to address what I saw as one of the biggest remaining unmet needs in electrophysiology, which is, we have technology that's good at treating the atria. In fact, Farapulse is damn good at treating atrial fibrillation. And so where is the big unmet need? It's in the ventricle, it's in the bottom chambers. And those are the deadly arrhythmias. Those are the ones that are just hard to treat. Those are procedures that take 4 hours on average now. Like, so is it a lot like what AFib was like in 2011 when I first started trying to solve that problem? And so I see it resonates with me, and and then if you look at pulse field, this first generation of pulse field, is good. It's amazing. But the first time I ever got to do a patient with my own technology, with Farapulse, I put it in, and I have been working for the last 15 years to learn everything I can about how to optimize it, how to make it better, how to apply it. And I felt it was a little old fashioned. It felt kind of 10 years old. And so when I just knew that, boy, there's just so much more we can do with pulse field than we currently have. And I know it looks like it's been super transformative, and everything from here on out is going to be small incremental improvements. But I saw an opportunity to show the world that not only that we could make another big leap in the platform itself, in pulse field, get it, and for the first time ever, have an effective tool to treat these deadly arrhythmias.
Wow. So you're targeting the lower chambers, the ventricles, targeting these deadly arrhythmias, and the tissue in those lower chambers is a lot thicker. So there must be some aspects of the technology that you've modified for that deployment or that application.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, atria is pretty thin, 2 millimeters, max maybe 5 millimeters in a few spots. It's pretty smooth. Most of the chamber is pretty smooth. So it's kind of predictable, and it doesn't move a lot. Like parts of it will kind of move. It takes blood in and lets it move into the bottom chambers. The ventricle is highly irregular, super thick, and it moves centimeters with every contraction of the heart. And so to get stability and to move around in there, and then you have complex structures called trabeculi and then the chordae of the valves and things just get in your way. It's just a very challenging environment for the historic tools to work in. Now, good news, we've been using those tools for decades, and we have the most, we can treat patients really well, but it just takes a lot of skill and a lot of time. And so pulse field, to get that depth, to get full transmurality in some cases, or at least get very, very deep, the electric field is like a gravitational field. And the best way to reach deep is to have very high voltages. And so instead of this 2000-volt kind of stuff that's typical of the first generation PFA, I decided to make a big leap and go way up in voltage. And that has been really helpful here for reaching deep.
Right. Were there new considerations you had to take into account when you increased the voltage to those levels?
What's counterintuitive to most people is that by increasing voltage, we can actually decrease the total energy. So I use less energy. It sounds big, but remember, if you ever grew up in a family with a brother, all right, like, you know, uh, did you ever like shock each other with static shocks?
Yeah,
Like
all the time.
you just kind of, yeah, you kind of you get yourself all charged up and then zap your little brother or whatever, right? So I grew up, I had some brothers, and I wasn't the oldest one, so I tended to be on the receiving end of that. But that's like 60,000 volts,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So that static discharge is very high. So high energy, I mean, high voltage, but low energy is actually something you can take advantage of when you're trying to tweak the cells and get the precision and get the versatility. And that's where this next generation of pulse field, I think, is going to go. There are big challenges, technical challenges to achieving that, but thank God I'm surrounded by some really amazing engineers who help there. But
So you've increased the voltage, but then you've decreased dramatically the delivery.
yeah, the delivery time is a lot faster. Like, it's a blink of an eye. So different recipes, right? Like the one that we have in the ventricle, we repeat it a few times. So yeah, one spot, zap, 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 and then move it and zap, 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 zap. So, but instead of being a 4-hour procedure, we see visibility on having VT ablation be kind of someday be a routine 1.5 hour or even a 1 hour procedure. Because we're taking away a lot of the unknowns and the challenges that we currently face. And the clinical trial results from the pilot study we did, got published in Circulation, I think largely because it's one of the most successful VT ablation trials ever run. A small sample, but I'm super proud of that.
Yeah. So then what's next? Are you moving towards larger clinical trials at field or what's next?
So fields, it's conceived as really, I like to think of it as the true kind of, the culmination of all my knowledge, all these years of working in pulse field. And so it's a platform technology that can really do the ventricle really well. But we immediately ran a trial in AFib as well. And so that we can show people that it's the versatility of the platform. So field is expanded beyond the ventricle to also include trial work showing the value for um, you know, uh, 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 atrial fibrillation in particular, but any arrhythmia where you need the versatility of a focal catheter. So that's it. That's the main thing that field is focused on. And this year we're going to start uh, our pivotal trial, our FDA trial. So we got breakthrough status. We got into the TAP program. You couldn't ask for a better experience in the world of startups. Companies funded. It's all that stuff.
Oh, it's very exciting. And I also find it fascinating that you've started exploring some work with PFA outside of the heart as well with Dell MedTech. What's
Yeah. So
the
Dell MedTech. I mean, here's the short story about that, which is, it's Over the last 5 years, there's been probably $5 billion, if not more, poured into the R&D surrounding cardiac PFA ablation innovation, learning everything we can about how to optimize this for delivery in a very challenging part of the body. But it turns out, if you really go back in the history of electric field mediated tissue injury technology, you go back to the 1800s, they're doing this thing called fulguration. You go back to the early 80s, they're doing, pulses, but, they were DC pulses and things like that. But the place where electroporation or fulguration was used was cancer. And there's been some interest out there, but there just hasn't been the level of science and innovation, um, the you know that that we have in cardiology. So cardiology is a cauldron of innovation that's well funded, and all that knowledge could be applied to all the other parts of the body where we currently do ablation with thermal tools or other tools, right? And there's already a number of people working on prostate. There's the ENT. There's some GI applications, and I look at that and I say, well, boy, can we take what we've learned in EP in our space, and especially with the type of generator that Field has built, and can we apply that to problems outside the heart and transform those areas as well? And my answer is yes. And
Yeah.
that's Dell MedTech.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really exciting. And again, going back to this concept of having a front row seat of the unmet need, from a clinician's point of view, are there other emerging spaces or technologies outside of PFA that excite you?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll put in Needle Eye is one of them. A company I helped start with Eric Sauter and John Slump was called Atriverse, which is just entered the market. It's a radio frequency crossing wire. So it helps you to get from the blue blood side of the heart to the red blood side of the heart to do all these types of procedures to put in. If you're a doctor, he's going to put in a left atrial appendage closure tool. If you're going to do a mitral clip to close the mitral regurgitation, or a number of other procedures are done there. And yeah, that's exciting. I personally deeply interested in a number of kind of cool medical technologies that I've seen out there. But if we were to sell Field, and and it was to be in the market, and I could focus my attention on the next big thing, I don't know. I might go into space propulsion. Right?
Yeah.
Because the guys who are, I really like the high voltage aspect of ion drives, and I'm kind of a nerd like that. And it would be fun to kind of get out of the medicines world and go out into space and compete with Elon Musk and those guys. They don't know what they're doing.
Space propulsion. Okay, we'll stay close to that. Um, I'm curious, as you've transitioned out of clinical practice just within the last year or so, and part of your motivation was to have that front row seat. How do you maintain that view into unmet needs in the clinical environment?
It'll become harder.
Yeah,
It'll become
but
harder. I hope that I have enough momentum, that front row seat, even if I'm sitting in the second row, I'll still have access in a way. I'm involved in, I know, I go to the procedures, and I'm hoping that that my spidey sense of medtech need remains strong, but it may not, and so, as I transition into more and more of a, kind of a, company building kind of role, I'm going to be relying and leaning heavily on my friends who remain in practice.
yeah, and I can imagine in the circles you run in, you must get phone calls weekly about concepts, ideas that are worth exploration, and now that you've gone through the cycle a few times, your ability to kind of really go deep and understand what they're seeing is probably very well tuned.
Yeah, I feel confident about that. And and I really enjoy talking to fellow doctors, even outside like topics that I have no idea. Sit down with a urologist or something, and they tell me what what their problems are and what their challenges are and what their vision is of how to make it better. That's a lot of fun to kind of be in that stage of idea um, creation and give them some advice. You know, I'll say most doctors are don't want to give up practice to jump in. They don't mind dipping their toe in the water a little bit, but there are a few of them out there that I know that got bold enough and really did it. But very few of them maintain two halves for any amount of time.
Right. Well, and so what's some advice that you would give to a physician or clinician who's considering starting a company?
Uh, oh, there's a lot of advice there.
Where to start?
Um, yeah, no, so I mean, the reality kind of boils down to, if you have the fire to work 24/7 all the time on your idea and moving it forward, then uh that's the first thing, right? You have to have that energy, that in order to kind of and the belief in the mission to take it from concept to commercial. The hard part is, so when I talk to people who would be first time physician inventors who want to do this, I kind of just bring them through a lot of the scars that I've developed, a lot of the pain points, and I kind of make them really, nothing will get to the finish line if you don't know exactly how you're going to make money on it. Not you, but somebody has to
Right.
make money on it. And and because a lot of ideas are great ideas, but there isn't a way to like if the margins aren't there and all those things, like I make them work backwards from how do you picture this rolling out and what would it cost to do this? And those are things that most of the doctors don't actually think about early on. And I like to kind of bring those realities starkly into focus for them from the beginning, and then but it's really like MBA pitch contest kind of stuff, yeah. Because once they start seeing the challenges of taking an idea from concept to clinic, especially if it's a class 3 device or something like that, I would highly recommend nobody ever work on class 3 devices. but 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 once if that hasn't like doused their fire of excitement, uh then they're ready to go, and it's just nonstop hard work.
Right. So that's a good gut check in terms of some level of readiness for commitment because there's great reward on the other side in terms of really bringing something to market that has a transformational impact on society and on patients, but it comes with a lot of challenges and a lot of effort to get there for sure, for sure.
Yeah, when I started Iowa Approach Farapulse, when I started that company, I went out to raise money, and I told people that they were investing in it was a philanthropic investment. And it didn't really play very well with investors.
Shockingly,
And
shockingly. Yeah.
pretty much you got to figure out, how you make money, and then and have an honest, like way. Because I mean, I don't know many doctors who have $100 million to put into a med device company. You're going to have to go out and get it somehow.
Yeah, yeah. So at the end of the day, what's more difficult, being an aspiring musician or being an aspiring medtech entrepreneur?
I would say entrepreneur is harder. The but med a musician is sort of an entrepreneur. A matter of fact, I think I some of my business skills really came out of that. I never thought of myself as a business guy, but we were doing contracts, and I had to herd the sheep and of my bandmates and get them onto the road and book stuff and keep people fed and gas in the car, and like you know, maybe that helped fuel my my success here. But yeah, I think. the realities of, it just takes a lot of experience uh, to see the vision of a startup and jump it and make it work. I think it's a lot harder than what I did as a musician.
But it's amazing how things have come full circle, and now seeing where PFA is and where PFA is going, it must be incredibly rewarding. Again, one of the most transformational innovations in cardiology in decades. So,
Yeah, I'm very proud to be a part of that story.
well, this has
Yeah, thank
been
you.
a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience and your perspective. I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Omari. I hope to see you at LSI.
Yes, we'll
All
see each
right.
other here soon.
All right.
And thank you all for joining us today on Powering the Future Within. If this conversation inspired you, follow the show and share it with your MedTech community. I'm Omari Bouknight. Stay inspired and keep innovating.